I never thought my life would take such a dramatic turn. For years, I believed I had it all: a happy marriage, a successful career, and a promising future. But, as often happens, life had other plans for me. My name is Sarah, and I'm 35 years old. A decade ago, I married Michael, the man I considered the love of my life. We met in college, and it was love at first sight. He was studying to become a commercial pilot, and I was majoring in business administration. Our dreams seemed to fit perfectly. He would fly around the world, and I would manage our home and my own career from solid ground. The first years of marriage were wonderful. Michael got a job as a pilot for a major airline, and I quickly climbed the ladder at a marketing firm. We had a comfortable life, traveled together when we could, and enjoyed each other's company. His parents adored us, and frequently organized family barbecues where we all gathered. It was at one of these gatherings that I met Charles, David, and Jack, my father-in-law's best friends. Charles was a successful businessman, always impeccably dressed, and with an air of sophistication that intrigued me. David, yes, he had the same name as my husband, was a talented architect with creativity that was reflected in every aspect of his life. And Jack, the youngest of the three, was a brilliant lawyer, with a charming smile and a sharp sense of humor. All three were attractive and charismatic men. But at that time, they represented nothing more than pleasant company during family gatherings. However, as the years passed, I began to notice subtle changes in my marriage. Michael was increasingly absent due to his work as a pilot. Long-distance flights kept him away from home for days, sometimes even weeks. At first I handled it well. I focused on my career, spent time with friends and family, and eagerly awaited the moments when Michael returned home. But slowly, loneliness began to take over. The nights became endless, the bed too big and cold without him. I tried to talk to Michael about my feelings, but he always seemed distracted or tired after his long flights. "It's just a phase, honey," he would say. "Soon I'll get shorter routes, and we'll be together more often." But those promises never materialized. It was in this moment of vulnerability that I began to see Charles, David, and Jack in a different light. The family barbecues became my escape, an oasis in the midst of my loneliness. Charles always had a fascinating story to tell about his business trips. David captivated me with his descriptions of the buildings he designed. And Jack always knew how to make me laugh, even on my worst days. I can't say exactly when or how it happened, but suddenly I found myself longing for these gatherings, eagerly waiting for the moment to see these three men. I felt guilty about these thoughts, but I convinced myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong. After all, they were just friends, right? The turning point came at my father-in-law's 60th birthday. Michael, my husband, couldn't attend due to a last-minute flight. I felt devastated and abandoned once again. That night, after a few too many drinks, I found myself crying in the backyard. It was Charles who found me. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked, with genuine concern in his voice. I shook my head, unable to hold back the tears. "I'm sorry. It's just that I've been feeling so lonely lately." Charles sat next to me and put his arm around me. The warmth of his body was comforting, and for a moment, I allowed myself to lean on him. "You don't have to apologize," he murmured. "We all feel lonely sometimes." I looked up and our eyes met. There was an intensity in his gaze that I had never noticed before. Without thinking, I leaned towards him, and our lips met in a passionate kiss. It was as if a dam had broken. All the loneliness, frustration, and repressed desire poured into that kiss. When we finally separated, we were both breathless. This shouldn't have happened," I said, though a part of me wished it would happen again. Charles nodded, but I could see the desire in his eyes. "You're right," he said. "But I can't deny that I've wanted this for a long time." That night marked the beginning of my downward spiral. What started as a moment of weakness turned into a passionate affair. Charles and I began seeing each other in secret, taking advantage of every moment when Michael was out of town. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, that I was just filling a void my husband had left. But deep down, I knew I was betraying not only Michael, but also myself. and everything I believed in. Things got even more complicated when, during another family barbecue, David, my father-in-law's friend, confessed his feelings for me. "Sarah, I know this is wrong," he told me in a moment when we were alone. "But I can't stop thinking about you. There's something special about you that captivates me." I was speechless. On one hand, I felt flattered and attracted to David. On the other, the weight of my affair with Charles was crushing me. But instead of doing the right thing and ending it all, I found myself wrapped up in another clandestine relationship. David was different from Charles. While everything with Charles was passion and fire, with David it was softer, more romantic. He took me to art galleries, talked to me about architecture, and made me feel intellectually stimulated in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. My life became a series of lies and deceptions. Every time my husband returned home, I acted as if everything was perfectly normal, while inside I was consumed by guilt. But the adrenaline of the affairs, the excitement of being desired and admired, prevented me from stopping. It was then that Jack entered the equation. He had always been the youngest and most carefree of the group. But one day he surprised me with a revelation I didn't expect. "Sarah, I know what's going on," he told me quietly during one of the barbecues. My heart stopped for a moment, fearing he had discovered my affairs with Charles and David. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "I've seen how Charles and David look at you," he replied. "And how you look at them. I know something's going on." I froze, not knowing what to say. But Jack continued. "I'm not here to judge you, Sarah. I just want you to know that I feel something for you too. And unlike them, I'm willing to wait. To be here for you when you realize you deserve better than clandestine encounters and lies." His words hit me like a punch in the stomach. Jack, the jokester, the free spirit of the group, was offering me something I didn't even know I needed: understanding and patience. From that moment on, my life became a whirlwind of emotions and secret encounters. Charles offered me passion and adventure, David romance and intellectuality, and Jack a promise of something deeper and more meaningful. And in the midst of all this was Michael, my husband, oblivious to the storm developing around him. Each day was an internal struggle. I hated myself for what I was doing, but I couldn't stop. It was as if I was trying to feel an infinite void inside me. And each of these men represented a part of what I thought I needed. The lies became increasingly elaborate. I invented work meetings, outings with non-existent friends, any excuse to be able to meet my lovers. My life became a complicated puzzle of deceptions. And I was the only one who knew all the pieces. There were moments when I was on the verge of confessing everything. Moments when the guilt crushed me, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. But the fear of losing everything, of facing the consequences of my actions, always stopped me. One night, while having dinner with Michael during one of his rare days at home, I almost broke down. He looked at me with so much love and trust that I felt as if my heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. "You know, I've been thinking," he said with a smile. "Maybe it's time we start thinking about having children. I know my work complicates things, but I think we could make it work." His words were like a dagger. The idea of bringing a child into this mess I had created horrified me. It was at that moment that I realized how far I had gone. How much damage I was causing not only to Michael, but to myself. I need time to think about it," I managed to respond, fighting against the tears that threatened to spill. That night, while Michael slept peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I had to end all of this. I couldn't keep living this lie. I couldn't keep hurting the people I cared about. The next day, I decided to face the situation head-on. I started with Charles. I asked him to meet me at a discreet cafe, far from our usual meeting places. "Charles, this has to end," I told him bluntly once we sat down. I saw the surprise and pain in his eyes. "Why, Sarah? I thought we had something special." "What we have is a lie," I replied, feeling the words burn my throat. "I married Charles, and even if my marriage isn't perfect, I can't continue with this. It's not fair to anyone." Charles tried to persuade me. He talked about his feelings, about how we could be together if I left Michael. But I knew that wasn't an option. I couldn't build a relationship on the foundations of betrayal. My next stop was David, the architect. This conversation was even more difficult. David had developed deep feelings for me, and seeing him crushed by my words was devastating. I thought we had something real, he told me, his voice broken with emotion. I thought that maybe, with time. I'm sorry, David, I replied, fighting against my own tears. I should never have let this go so far. You're a wonderful man, but I can't keep deceiving you or myself. Finally, it was time to talk to Jack. Of the three, he took it the best, although I could see the pain in his eyes. I always knew this day would come. He told me with a sad smile. I just hoped that when you realized what you really wanted, you'd choose me. His words moved me deeply. Jack, you're incredible. You deserve someone who can love you completely, without reservations or secrets. And that someone isn't me. After these conversations, I felt physically and emotionally exhausted. I had ended my affairs, but I knew the road ahead would be even more difficult. I had to face Michael and confess everything. I waited for him to return from his next flight. The days of waiting were agony. I practiced 1,000 times what I was going to say to him, but I knew that no words could soften the blow I was about to deliver. When he finally came home, I knew it was time. I couldn't postpone it any longer. Michael, we need to talk, I said as soon as he walked through the door. He looked at me, confused by the seriousness of my tone. What's wrong, honey? Is everything okay? No, it's not okay, I replied, feeling tears beginning to form in my eyes. I've done something terrible, Michael. Something unforgivable. And so, with my heart in my hand, I told him everything. I told him about my loneliness, about how I felt abandoned and neglected. I told him about Charles, about David, and about Jack. I didn't omit any detail, no matter how painful. I owed him that. I owed him the complete truth. I watched as his face went from confusion to shock, and finally to a mixture of pain and anger that I had never seen in him before. How could you? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. How could you do this to me? To us? I'm sorry, was all I could say, the words sounding hollow even to me. I'm so sorry, Michael. What followed was a storm of emotions. Michael shouted, cried, accused me of destroying everything we had built together. And he was right. With my actions, I had demolished the trust and love that had been the foundation of our marriage. I want a divorce, he finally said, after what seemed like an eternity of recriminations and tears. Although I expected those words, hearing them was like receiving a physical blow. But I knew I had no right to protest, to fight for our marriage. I had made that decision for both of us when I chose to be unfaithful. I understand, I replied through tears. You have every right to want to end this. I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry, Michael. I never meant to hurt you like this. Michael looked at me with a mixture of pain and contempt that broke my heart. Your apologies don't fix anything, Sarah. I can't even look at you right now. I need you to leave the house. Tonight. I nodded silently, knowing I had no right to protest. I packed some things in a suitcase, took my laptop and wallet, and headed for the door. Before leaving, I turned to Michael one last time. I loved you, Michael. I really did. And I'm sorry I ruined everything. He didn't respond, just turned his back on me. I closed the door behind me, feeling like I was closing an entire chapter of my life. The following weeks were a blur of pain, guilt, and self-approach. I stayed in a hotel, unable to face friends or family. My work suffered. I could barely concentrate on the most basic tasks. I spent sleepless nights, going over and over my mistakes, wondering how I had reached this point. It was during one of those sleepless nights when I made another crucial decision. I needed professional help. I couldn't go on like this, drowning in my own guilt and misery. I needed to understand why I had done what I did and how I could avoid making the same mistakes in the future. I found a therapist, Dr. Anderson, and started seeing her twice a week. At first it was hard for me to open up. I felt ashamed of my actions and feared being judged. But Dr. Anderson was patient and understanding. Sarah, she told me in one of our first sessions. What you did caused a lot of pain, that's true. But punishing yourself eternally isn't going to change the past. We need to understand why it happened and how you can heal and grow from this. Little by little, I began to unravel the tangle of emotions and motivations that had led me to infidelity. We talked about my childhood, about my past relationships, about my fears and insecurities. I discovered that much of my behavior was rooted in a deep fear of abandonment and a constant need for external validation. You were looking for in other men what you felt was missing in your marriage, Dr. Anderson explained. But instead of communicating your needs to Michael, you chose a destructive path. Those words hit me hard. It was true. Instead of facing the problems in my marriage head on, I had sought an easy way out. I had preferred the excitement of clandestine affairs to the difficult task of working on my relationship. As I progressed in therapy, I began to feel the need to make peace not only with myself, but also with Michael. I didn't expect his forgiveness, not even for him to want to see me. But I felt I needed to express my remorse in a more meaningful way than my hasty apology the night I left. I wrote him a long letter. In it, I explained everything I had learned about myself in therapy. I told him about my insecurities, my fears, and how I had projected all of that onto our marriage. I told him that I understood the damage I had caused him, and that I fully accepted responsibility for my actions. I don't expect your forgiveness, Michael. I wrote at the end of the letter. I just want you to know that I'm working hard to be a better person. I deeply regret hurting you and destroying what we had. You will always be an important part of my life, and I wish you all the happiness in the world. I sent the letter without expectations. To my surprise, a few weeks later, Michael contacted me. He wanted to see me. We met in a neutral park, away from the memories of our life together. Michael looked tired, but there was a calmness in him that I didn't expect to see. "Thank you for your letter," he said after an awkward greeting. It took me time to be able to read it without feeling anger, but it helped me understand some things. I nodded, not knowing what to say. Michael continued. "I'm not going to lie to you, Sarah. What you did destroyed me. I trusted you completely, and you betrayed that trust in the worst possible way." His words hurt, but I knew they were true. "I know," I replied softly. "And I'm so sorry, Michael. I can never express how much I regret it." Michael sighed deeply. "I've been in therapy too, you know. And I've had to face some difficult truths about myself and our marriage." I was surprised to hear this. I never imagined Michael, always so confident and self-sufficient, would seek professional help. I realized that I also have part of the blame in what happened. He continued. "Not in your actions, those were your choice. But in the deterioration of our marriage. I was so focused on my career that I left you alone. I didn't see the signs that you were suffering." His words moved me deeply. I didn't expect this level of introspection from him. "That doesn't justify what I did," I said. "I could have talked to you. I could have insisted that we work on our problems. Instead, I chose the cowardly path." Michael nodded. "That's true. And that choice has brought us here." We remained silent for a moment, both lost in our thoughts. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I finally asked, almost fearing the answer. Michael looked me directly in the eyes. "I'm working on its error, not for you, but for me. Because resentment and bitterness only hurt me. But forgiveness is a process, and it will take time." I felt a relief that I didn't know I needed. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, not even a friendship. But it was a ray of hope in the midst of the darkness I had created. "Thank you, Michael," I said sincerely. "For listening to me, for being here. I know I don't deserve it." "It's not about deserving," he replied, "it's about healing. We both need to heal." We said goodbye shortly after, with the promise to stay in touch during the divorce process. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. I knew I had lost something precious, but I also felt that I was on the right path towards redemption. The following months were a period of intense personal growth. I continued my therapy, facing my demons and working on my self-esteem and emotional dependency issues. Little by little, I began to rebuild my life. I quit my job and decided to start over in a new city. I needed a change of scenery, away from the memories and temptations of the past. I found a small apartment and a job at a startup, where I could use my marketing skills in a more creative and satisfying way. As time passed, I began to feel more at peace with myself. I no longer woke up every morning drowning in guilt and regret. I learned to forgive myself, not to excuse my actions, but to be able to grow from them. One day, almost a year after my separation from Michael, I received a message from him. Our divorce had been finalized, and he wanted to see me one last time, before moving abroad for work. We met in the same park where we had our conversation months ago. This time, the atmosphere was different. Lighter, less charged with unresolved emotions. "You look good, Sarah," Michael said with a small smile. "You too," I replied. And it was true. There was a peace in him that I hadn't seen in a long time. We talked for hours. About our lives, our jobs, our healing processes. It was an honest and open conversation without reproaches or accusations. In the end, Michael surprised me with his words. "I want you to know that I've forgiven you, Sarah," he said softly. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I thought I could never do it. But I have, for my own good. I felt tears begin to form in my eyes. "Thank you, Michael. It means a lot to me to hear that." "I didn't do it for you," he clarified. "I did it for me. But I'm glad it helps you too." I nodded, understanding completely. "I know, and I'm happy for you. You deserve peace and happiness, Michael." We said goodbye with a hug. Something that wouldn't have been possible months ago. As I watched him walk away, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Michael's forgiveness was the last step I needed to completely close that chapter of my life. That night, sitting in my small apartment, I reflected on everything that had happened in the last year and a half. I had made terrible mistakes. I had hurt people I loved. I had destroyed the life I had built. But I had also learned valuable lessons about myself, about honesty, loyalty, and the true meaning of love and respect. I realized that, despite all the pain and chaos, I had emerged as a stronger and more authentic person. I no longer needed constant validation from others to feel valuable. I had learned to communicate my needs in a healthy way, and to establish clear boundaries in my relationships. I thought about Charles, David, and Jack, and hoped that they too had found peace and moved on with their lives. I knew I would never see them again, and I was okay with that. They were part of a past that I had left behind. As I looked out the window at the city lights, I felt a sense of hope that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I didn't know what the future held for me, but for the first time in years, I was excited to find out. I promised myself that I would never forget the lessons I had learned from this experience. That I would always value honesty and integrity above momentary excitement. That I would constantly work on myself, on my relationships, on being the best version of myself I could be. And so, with my heart full of a mixture of nostalgia, regret, and hope, I prepared for the next chapter of my life. A chapter that I would write with wisdom, compassion, and above all with authenticity. As I lay down that night, I remembered a phrase my therapist had once told me. The greatest act of courage is to forgive yourself. And for the first time, I felt that I had truly achieved it. With that thought, I closed my eyes and drifted into a peaceful sleep, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Because now I knew that, no matter what happened, I had the strength to handle it with grace and dignity. And so, my story of betrayal and redemption came to an end. But my true journey, that of living an authentic and fulfilling life, was just beginning.